Chapter 29 The Great Beyond. At Mary's insistence, they had returned to Atlantic City to search for Vari, but he was nowhere to be found. In the end, Mary had to accept that something horrible had befallen him. Either he had slipped off the pier, or he had been captured by the McGill's returning crew and taken out to sea aboard the Sulphur Queen, which was also gone. She could have gone after the ship, but it wasn't even on the horizon anymore, and there was no telling in what direction it had gone. As it had been when Nick and Leaf were captured by the Haunter, Mary had to put her children ahead of her own desires. She had 1,000 refugee afterlights aboard the airship, and her first responsibility was to them. Barry was lost, and it weighed heavily on her, for it had been her fault and her fault alone. With mournful resignation, she ordered Speedo to take the Heidenberg aloft, and the ship of refugees resumed its journey north. Once they were airborne, Mary took to the stateroom she had claimed for herself, closed the door, lay down on the bed, and cried. Then she did something she hadn't allowed herself to do for many years. She closed her eyes and slept. Nick, however, did not sleep. He was emotionally exhausted, and should have, at the very least, taken some time to rest. But there was too much on his mind. There were things that simply weren't sitting right, and he knew he wouldn't be able to relax until he figured them out. High up in the girders of the airship, Nick sat on a catwalk in front of the bucket of coins that Mary had left in his care. Leaf found him up there and sat across from him. "They're mine, you know," Leaf said. "I found them." "I thought you didn't care about things like that anymore." "I don't," said Leaf. "I'm just saying." Nick pulled out one of the coins. It was so worn there was no way of telling what kind of coin it was, what country it had come from, or what year it was made. They were all like that, even the one he had found in his pocket way back when, the one he had used to make a wish in Mary's fountain. Funny how both the McGill and Mary had a collection of these coins. As he held the coin, cool in his palm, Nick could have sworn it felt a little different. It felt almost electrified, like a fuse completing a circuit. That's when an understanding began to come to Nick. An understanding that Nick instinctively knew was the tip of something very big and very important. He took the coin from his palm and held it between thumb and forefinger. "Did you know," Nick told Leaf, "that they used to put coins on dead people's eyes?" "Why?" asked Leaf. "To keep their eyelids from opening and making people scream?" "No, it was this old superstition. People used to think that the dead had to pay their way into the afterlife. The ancient Greeks even believed there was this ferryman you had to pay to take you across the river of death." Leaf shrugged, unimpressed. "I don't remember any ferry." Neither did Nick. But then, maybe people saw what they expected to see. Maybe the ancient Greeks saw a river instead of a tunnel. Maybe they saw a ferry instead of a light. "I have an idea," Nick said. "Give me your hand." Leaf held out his hand. "Are you going to do a magic trick? Are you going to make the coin disappear?" "I don't know," said Nick. "Maybe." He put the coin in Leaf's palm, then folded Leaf's fingers around it until the coin was firmly in his closed fist. "How does it feel?" "It's warm," said Leaf. "It's really warm." Nick waited and watched. A moment passed, then another, and then Leaf suddenly looked up and gasped. Nick followed his gaze, but saw nothing, just the girders and hydrogen bladder of the airship. "What is it? What do you see?" Whatever it was, Leaf was too enthralled to answer. Then, when Nick looked at Leaf's eyes, he saw something reflected in his pupils. It was a spot of bright light, growing larger and brighter. Leaf's expression of wonder mellowed into a joyous smile, and he said, "I remember now." "Leaf!" yelled Nick. "No," said Leaf. "But my real name is Travis." Then, in the blink of an eye, and in a rainbow of twinkling of light, Travis, also known as Leaf of the Dead Forest, finally got where he was going. Mary called the coins worthless, but Nick now knew the truth. He also knew that Mary wasn't stupid. She must have known the coin's true value, their true purpose, and it troubled Nick that she would hide something so important. Leaf was gone forever to some great beyond. The air where Leaf had been just a second before now shimmered with color, but in a moment the shimmering faded. Nick no longer had his own coin. He had hurled it into Mary's wishing well, just as every single kid in her care had done. It was a requirement of admission. But now Nick had an entire bucket of them in front of him. He reached in and pulled out another coin, placing it in his own palm, feeling that odd current again. The coin was still cold in his hand, though, and Nick instinctively knew that while Leaf had been ready for his final journey, Nick wasn't. Nick still had work to do here in Everlost, and he had a sneaking suspicion he knew what that work would be. Hammerhead was happily, if somewhat unsuccessfully, gnawing at a girder when he saw Nick approaching. "What time is it?" he asked. "I don't know. Noon, maybe? Hey, Hammerhead, could you do something for me?" "Sure, what?" "Could you hold this for a few seconds?" And he put a coin into Hammerhead's hand. "Tell me, is it warm or is it cold?" "Wow," said Hammerhead, "it's hot." "Good," said Nick. "Would you like to see a magic trick?" It was late in the afternoon when Mary awoke. When she looked out of her cabin window, she saw the asphalt of the airfield tarmac. They had returned to Lake Hurst. Speedo had told her he didn't feel comfortable landing the airship anywhere else. It was hard enough to get him to land on the steel pier. She supposed convincing him to take them all the way back to Manhattan was out of the question. If they were lucky, the train would still be there waiting for them. If not, they would have to walk, following the dead tracks all the way home. At worst, it would take them a few days to get there. Then she could begin the task of processing this large group of children and integrating them into her society. In one fell swoop, the population of her little community had quadrupled. But as she had told them, there was more than enough room. She would convert more floors into living space. She would work with finders to furnish them in comfort. And in the meantime, she would give each of these children her personal attention, helping them, one by one, to find their perfect niche. It was a monumental yet noble task, and with Nick's help, she'd be able to do it. When she left her cabin, she was surprised to find the hallways and salons of the airship empty. There were no voices coming from the higher reaches of the ship either. Nick must have already aroused them and gotten them off the ship. He was very efficient, and it was good of him to let her sleep, although it wasn't exactly her plan to sleep the entire day. She descended the gangway expecting to find kids clustered around, but there were none. There was only one figure out there, someone sitting on the ground 100 yards away. As she approached, she could see that it was Nick. He sat crisscross, staring at the Heidenberg. She realized he was waiting there for her. Beside him sat the bucket of coins. Only now did Mary begin to get worried. "This is a pretty big dead spot," Nick said. "The entire tarmac," Mary answered. "The death of the Heidenberg was a large-scale event. The ground here will remember it forever." She waited for Nick to say something more, but he didn't. "So," Mary said, "where is everyone?" "Gone," said Nick. "Gone," echoed Mary, still not sure she had heard him correctly. "Gone where, exactly?" Nick stood up. "Don't know. Not my business." Mary looked into the bucket at his feet. To her horror, the bucket was empty. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, what he was telling her. "All of them?" She looked around the tarmac, hoping for a sign that wasn't true, but there was not a soul in sight. "What can I say?" said Nick. "They were all ready to go." For the first time in her memory, Mary was speechless. This was a betrayal of such magnitude there was no words to express it. It was as awful and as evil as anything Mikey had done in all his years as a monster. It was worse. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mary knew she was screaming, but she didn't care. How dare he? How dare he do this to her? "I know exactly what I've done," said Nick, with all the calm in his voice that Mary had lost. "I let them go to where they should have gone in the first place." "How dare you presume to know where they should have gone? They were here, which means this is where they were meant to be." "I don't believe that." "Who cares what you believe?" It was as if she was looking at a different boy. She had taken him into her confidence. She had trusted him. They were going to be a team, benevolently leading the afterlights of Everlost forever and ever. This wasn't supposed to happen. Then Nick's expression changed, and for the first time his calm took a turn toward anger and accusation. "How long have you known?" Nick demanded. Mary refused to answer him. "Did you know about the coins from the beginning? How long have you been robbing them from the children who came to you for help?" She found she couldn't face the accusation and couldn't meet his eye. "Not from the beginning," she grumbled. "And I'm not a thief. They throw their coins into the fountain by choice. They can take them out any time they want, but no one does. And do you know why? Because they don't want to. No, they don't take back their coins because it's your fountain and they wouldn't dream of going against Miss Mary. But if they knew the truth about what these coins did, what they were really for, they'd take them in a second." "My children are happy," insisted Mary. "They're lost, and you're no better than your brother." Before Mary even knew what she was doing, she brought back her hand and slapped him across the face with the full force of her fury. For a moment she wanted to take it back and tell him that she was sorry, but then she realized she wasn't sorry at all. She wanted to slap him again and again and again until she slapped some sense into him. What had she done to deserve this treachery? She had cared about him. More than that, she had loved him. She loved him still, and now she hated the fact that she loved him. Nick recovered from the slap, then picked up the bucket and tilted it toward her. "Strange," he said, "but there were exactly enough coins in there for every afterlight." "So what?" said Mary. 1,000 afterlights, 1,000 coins. Nothing strange about that." "Look again." Mary looked into the bucket to see that it wasn't entirely empty. 2 coins remained. "2 coins," said Nick. "2 of us." "Coincidence," said Mary. She would not be swayed by it. This was not the universe trying to tell her something. This was not the hand of God reaching out to them. Mary didn't need a bucket to tell her what God's purpose for her was. She reached in, picked up a coin, and prepared to throw it as far from her sight as possible. But then Nick said, "Is it warm or is it cold?" Mary felt the coin in her hand. "It's cold," she told him. "Cold as death." Nick sighed. "Mine's cold too. So I guess neither of us are going anywhere for a while." And then he added, "All these years here, and you're still not ready." "I'll never be ready," said Mary. "I'll never leave Everlost, because this world is the eternal one, and it's my job to find lost souls to fill it. It's my job to find them and take care of them. Why can't you understand that?" "I do understand it," Nick said. "And maybe you're right. Maybe that is your job. But now I think I have a job too, and my job is to help those same lost souls get to where they're going." Mary looked at the ugly coin in her hand. What was so wonderful about the end of the tunnel? How did anyone know if the bright light was a light of love or of flames? If there was one thing Mary knew, it was the simple rule that every mother tells her child. If you're lost, stay put. Don't walk away. Don't wander off. Don't talk to strangers, and just because you see a light, it doesn't give you permission to cross the street. Lost children stay put. How could Nick not see the sense in that? At the sound of a car engine, Mary looked up to see Speedo drive up in the Jaguar she had given him. At least he was smart enough not to hurl himself down a dark tunnel. "The train's waiting," Speedo said. Nick turned to Mary. "I'm going back to the Twin Towers," he said, "and I'm going to tell all these kids what I know." "They won't listen to you," Mary told him. "I think they will." There was certainty in Nick's voice, and Mary knew why. It was because he was right, and they both knew it. As much as Mary wanted to believe otherwise, she knew her children would take their coins back. They would not be able to resist the temptation. That's why the temptation had to be taken away. "Why don't you come with me?" Nick said. "We can do it together." But Mary already knew what she had to do. Remove the temptation. And so, without even dignifying Nick with the response, she turned and ran back toward the giant Zeppelin alone. "Mary, wait!" She didn't want to hear anything he had to say. She climbed into the piloting gondola of the airship. If Speedo could pilot this thing, then so could she. and she would get back to her children before Nick did. He would never get the chance to poison their minds, because she would get there first and save them all. Chapter 30. Leaving Everlost. Although Allie had no way of knowing it, while she was encased in the jogger girl's body, Mikey McGill had never let her out of his sight. After what she had done to him, he wasn't letting her go, and even though she was hiding inside a living girl, eventually she would have to come out, and he'd have her. Vengeance drove him at first, but after a few hours, the feeling began to fade. The truth was, he admired Allie. She had been a worthy opponent. She had successfully outsmarted him, playing him for a fool, and he was a fool, wasn't he? How could he despise her for being more clever than him? Although Mikey had no skill at skinjacking, he did have another useful skill. He could rise from the depths. It was a skill he had never seen in anyone else. He only hoped it was powerful enough to do the job this time. Shiloh, the famous diving horse, had no problem leaping into the bay and following Allie as she fell. After all, diving from a frighteningly high place was exactly what it was trained to do. Like Allie, the horse and its rider passed through the air, through the water, and found themselves plunging through the darkness of the earth. The horse, not expecting this, began a panicked gallop through the stone. Locking his legs around the horse, Mikey spread his arms out wide, fishing with his fingers for a sign of Allie, until he finally found her, grabbed her, and pulled her onto the horse with him. Then he dug his heels in, and the horse worked harder against the stone. Mikey tried to imagine them all filled with hydrogen, like the airship, lighter than air, and most definitely lighter than stone. His powerful will battled the will of gravity, and soon they stopped sinking and began to rise. The forward momentum of the ghost horse trying to gallop through stone was greater than their upward momentum, but that was fine. Even if they were only moving up inch by inch, they'd get to the surface eventually. At last they surfaced in a New Jersey wood. It was dusk now, and they were a few miles inland from where they began. The second they were on the surface, Allie leapt off the horse, fully prepared to run if she had to. As far as she was concerned, Mikey McGill was not to be trusted, even if he did just rescue her. "I should have let you sink," Mikey said. "Why didn't you?" Mikey didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Where were you trying to go? Maybe I can help you get there." She hesitated, expecting to see some sort of deceit in him, but found none. "If you must know, I'm going home." Mikey nodded. "And then?" Allie opened her mouth to answer and found that nothing came out. Allie was a goal-oriented girl. The problem was she rarely thought beyond the goal. What was her plan, really? She would get home, but then what? She would see if her father survived the car accident. She would spend a little time watching her family's comings and goings. She would try to communicate with them. Maybe she would even find a neighbor willing to be skinjacked, and then talk to her family, convincing them it was her by telling them things she only could know. Allie would tell them she was all right, not to worry, and not to mourn. But then what? It was now that Allie figured out something she should have figured out a long time ago. Home was no longer home. She had denied it, refused to think about it, pretended it didn't matter, but she couldn't pretend anymore. If her great victory was going home, then her victory was an empty one. "I asked you a question," said Mikey. "What will you do after you go home?" Since Allie had no answer, she threw it back in his face. "That's my business," she said. "What about you? Are you going to make yourself into the one true monster of Everlost again?" Mikey gently kicked his heels into Shiloh's side to remind the horse to keep pulling his hoofs out of the ground so they didn't sink again. "I'm done with being a monster," he said. Then he reached into his pocket and threw something to Allie, and she caught it. It was a coin. "What's this for?" "What's this for?" "You can use it to get you where you're going." Allie looked at the coin, so similar to the one she had tossed into Mary's fountain. Did he mean what she thought he meant? To get where she was going. It was terrifying yet enticing, electrifying. She stared at the coin, then looked back up at Mikey. "Is that what you're doing then? Getting where you're going?" Allie thought she read some fear in his face at the suggestion. No, he said. I don't think I'm going anywhere good. I'm in no hurry to get there. Well, said Allie, you can probably change where you're going, don't you think? Mikey didn't seem too convinced. I was a pretty nasty monster, he said. Were, reminded Allie. That was then, this is now. Mikey seemed to appreciate her practical, logical view of things. So then, how long do you think it would take to make up for being a monster? Allie thought about the question. I have no idea, but some people believe that all it takes is a sincere decision to change, and you're saved. Maybe, said Mikey, but I'd rather play it safe. I was a monster for 40 years, so I'd say I need 30 years of good deeds to wipe the slate clean. Allie smiled. Allie smirked. Is Mikey McGill even capable of good deeds? Mikey frowned. Okay then, 60 years of halfway decent deeds. Fair enough, said Allie. She looked at the coin in her hand. It was lukewarm. She suspected if she held it long enough, it would get her where she was going. But just because she was ready to go, it didn't mean she had to just yet. It was a matter of choice. What was it her fortune had said? Linger or light, the choice is yours. Allie chose to put the coin in her hip pocket for now. She always had been good at saving her money. Mikey held out his hand to her, ready to lift her up onto the horse. Home, he asked? But suddenly it didn't seem all that urgent. There was still plenty of unknowns to explore here in Everlost. She could squeeze a lot of them in between here and home. There's no hurry, she told him, but Mikey wasn't pleased. Taking you home, he said, was going to be my first halfway decent deed. I'm sure you'll find another one. Mikey sighed in frustration. This is not going to be easy. I'm good at being bad, but I'm bad at being good. I don't know the first thing about good deeds. Well, Allie said with a grin, I do know a 12-step program. Then she grabbed Mikey's hand, climbed up on the horse with him, and they rode off together toward all things unknown. Nick had to win this race, even if the odds were against him, and so when the ghost train dropped him off at Old Penn Station, he wasted no time. It was dusk now. The train had been fast, but an airship didn't have to worry about tracks. His only hope was that Mary's learning curve when it came to flying the thing had slowed her down. When she had first taken to the airship was erratic, turning this way and that, unable to set a course. With any luck, she was still zigzagging across New Jersey, trying to get the hang of it. She ran at full speed from the station, all the way down to the plaza, at the base of the towers. The same kids were still playing kickball, jump rope, and playing tag. Is Mary here? He called out. He expected them to rush him and capture him. What was Mary's version of chiming? Nick had a suspicion that he was about to find out. But they didn't rush him. Instead, one of the kickball kids playing the outfield turned to him and said, Meadow says she went away for a while, but she'll be back real soon. Good, thought Nick. He had beaten her here, and now, when he looked west, he could see that he hadn't beaten her by much. Between the buildings to the west, Nick could see the zip line in the sky across the Hudson River, still high, but dropping toward them. It couldn't be any more than 5 miles away. Nick knew he didn't have much time. Go get Meadow, he told the kickball kid. Tell her to gather everyone at the fountain. Then the kickball kid ran off, confounding the daily pattern of his game. Nick went over to the fountain himself and stood on its lip, calling out to all the kids in the plaza. Everyone, listen to me. I have a message from Mary. That got their attention. Jump ropes stopped spinning, balls stopped bouncing. Kids began to converge on the fountain. Nick looked to the west again. The airship was there, halfway across the river. It was still too high, but that didn't matter. As soon as the kids saw it, the game would be over. He would lose their attention. He had to keep everyone focused on him. Meadow began to arrive with kids from the higher floors. Mary wants me to tell you that you no longer have to fear the McGill. She's cut him down to size. A cheer from the kids. And, said Nick, I have something very exciting to tell you. Okay, thought Nick. Here it goes. How many of you threw your wishes into the fountain? Every hand went up. And how many of your wishes came true? One by one, hands went down, until not a single one of them was left. Well, said Nick, it's time for all your wishes to come true. And with that, he jumped into the fountain, reached into the water, and started pulling up coins. Come on, he said. Everyone gets their coin back. At first, they were reluctant, until the first girl came forward, all pigtails and big eyes. She stepped into the fountain, and Nick took a coin, pressing it into her palm. The entire crowd watched and saw with their own eyes what happened next. The girl got where she was going. There was a long moment of silence as it hit home for these kids exactly what this meant for each of them, and then they all began climbing into the fountain themselves, lining up and accepting the coins from Nick. In less than a minute, their excitement reached critical mass. All sense of order broke down, and it became a wild rush of kids leaping, splashing, grabbing coins, and disappearing in rainbow sprays of light. Nick left the fountain and stood back to watch. To the west, the zip line was growing larger as it neared, eclipsing the setting sun. But if the kids crowding the fountain noticed, they didn't care. By the time Mary arrived, she would be too late. They'd be gone. Perhaps not every single one of them, but most of them. All the ones who were ready, as it should be. Nick looked up to the peaks of the Twin Towers, converging as they scraped the sky. He marveled at their majesty, the way Taurus had during the tower's 29 years of life. It was a comfort to know that they would never be gone completely, because they were here, a timeless part of Everlost. They were great monuments of memory, and although Mary had, for a time, turned them into her own personal orphanage, that was over now. They had a greater place in the scheme of things. By now, more than half the children were gone, and the rest were all well on the way. Meadow came up to Nick, and together they watched their joyful vanishings. Mary's going to have a fit when she sees this, Meadow said. It'll totally trip her out. Then she smiled. Good thing I won't be here to see it. Then Meadow ran forward toward the fountain, jumped in, and a moment later she was gone. Nick pulled his own coin from his pocket, the one he had salvaged from the empty bucket. It was still cold, as cold could be, but that was all right. He realized now that while his arrival had tied him to Allie, his departure was tied to Mary. As long as she was fighting to keep children here, he would be fighting to free them. He supposed that made them enemies. It almost made him laugh. How strange it was to be in love with your enemy. With the zipline coming in for landing, and the last of the children vanishing from the fountain, Nick put his hands in his own pocket and left strolling leisurely uptown. Perhaps Mary was right about Everlost being an eternal world, a place where all things and the places that have earned immortality remain forever in glory. If that were the case, then Everlost was like the grand museum of the universe, a heavenly and priceless gallery. As Mary once said, they were blessed to be able to see it. But a museum was to be visited and appreciated, not to be lived in. That was Mary's mistake. Afterlights were merely visiting, passing through. Nick knew there were more lost souls and lost places to free. There were more fountains and more buckets of coins to be found. And although he didn't know when he would ever get where he was going, he knew that when the time was right, he would get there. In the meantime, he had work to do. Okay, and there's one short last chapter. Chapter 31, The Sky Witch. The little girl sat knees to chest on the playground sand, not knowing what to do. The last she remembered, she was at the very tippy top of the jungle gym, above all the other kids. Then she had lost her balance and fallen. For the strangest moment, she had found herself running down a tunnel toward a distant light. If only she had listened to her mother and tied her shoelaces, she might not have tripped over her own feet on the way. Now she was here, still in the park, sitting on a small patch of sand beneath the jungle gym. Her parents were gone, and she instinctively knew they weren't coming back, but she didn't know how she knew it. When she had fallen, the park had been full of children, and the day had been hot. Now it was empty and cold. Even the trees, which had been lush and green, were now yellowing and losing their leaves. And the worst thing about it was that she couldn't move, because the rest of the playground had turned to quicksand. There was a sound far off in the sky, but getting closer, a mechanical groan that didn't quite sound like a plane or a helicopter. And when she turned toward the sound, she saw something amazing. A big silver thing came over the trees and lowered into an empty soccer field. It was like a blimp she had seen hovering above baseball games, but much, much bigger. Still, she held her knees to her chest, excited, terrified, as the giant blimp thing dropped down, hovering just a few feet above the soccer field. Then some sort of hatch opened. A ramp came down, and a creature all slender and green came out. No, not a creature at all. This was an angel. An angel in a green dress. She was coming right toward the girl, and the closer she got, the more of the girl's fear melted away. Finally, the angel reached the playground and looked at the girl through the wide cage-like bars of the jungle gym. "Don't be afraid," the angel said. "Everything's going to be all right, I promise." The girl looked toward the blimp thing, and the angel smiled. "Would you like to ride on my airship?" The girl nodded. Then the angel said, "It only costs a nickel." The girl looked down sadly. "I don't have any money." But the angel only smiled. "I'll bet you do. Why don't you check?" The little girl reached into her pockets, and to her surprise, she found a nickel in there. Or at least, she thought it was a nickel. It was too worn to tell. She held it out to the green angel, but then she hesitated. If, after all, this nickel was all that she had. Something told her she might not want to part with it so easily. The angel's smile faded, but only slightly. "I'm sure you don't want to stay here alone," she said. "If you do, the chocolate ogre might find you." "The chocolate ogre?" asked the little girl. "A monster," said the angel. "He lures you with the smell of chocolate, and then he captures you and sends you away." "Where?" asked the girl. The angel shook her head. "That's the scary part. No one knows." For a moment, the girl thought she saw a wave of sorrow wash across the angel's face, but it passed. "Now, wouldn't you rather come with me?" And so the girl gave her the coin, and the angel gently took her hand. "Now, let's find out what you like to do, and let you do it." The girl rose, and holding the angel's hand, she walked right through the bars of the jungle gym like magic. "Welcome to Everlost," the angel said as they crossed the field toward the silver blimp thing. "My name is Mary." "Are there other kids like me in your balloon?" the girl asked. "Just a couple," said Mary, "but there are lots more out there, and we'll find them all, won't we?" The girl nodded. "Yes, before the chocolate ogre does." Together they climbed into the silver airship and rose into the Everlost sky. The end.